My name was Warrant Officer Kenji Matsumoto of the 244th Air Group, Chafu Airfield, Tokyo. I say WAS, because the man who climbed into a Kawasaki Ki-61 fighter on the night of March 9, 1945, did not fully survive what he saw. His body landed safely. His mind never quite came back. You have heard the story of the Tokyo firebombing from American textbooks. You know the numbers: 279 B-29 Superfortresses, 665 tons of incendiary bombs, 16 square miles of the city burned to ash in a single night, between 80,000 and 100,000 people dead before sunrise. You know the American side, the crews who flew those planes, the generals who ordered the mission, the strategic calculations that made it happen. But no one has ever asked what it looked like from the cockpit of a Japanese fighter, circling above his own burning city, completely powerless to stop what was happening below him. I was 24 years old. This is what I saw. To understand that night, you must understand what the months before it had done to us. By early 1945, every Japanese fighter pilot who had been flying since the beginning of the war understood something that we were forbidden to say out loud. We were losing the air war. Not slowly, catastrophically. The Americans had changed everything in 1944. Their new fighter, the Grumman F-6F Hellcat, had taken our best pilots and torn them from the sky at a ratio we could not absorb. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June of 1944, they shot down 373 of our aircraft in a single day. American pilots called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. We called it a disaster we could never recover from. The pilots I had trained with, men I had eaten breakfast with, men whose children's names I knew, most of them were gone. And then the B-29s came. The first time I saw a B-29 in the sky above Japan, I did not believe what I was seeing. We had been told the Americans had a new bomber. We had heard rumors. A plane that could fly so high that our fighters could barely reach it. A plane so heavily armed that attacking it from behind meant flying into a wall of 50 caliber machine guns. We assumed this was exaggeration. American propaganda designed to break our spirit. It was not exaggeration. The B-29 Superfortress flew at altitudes between 25,000 and 30,000 feet. My Ki-61 fighter, the Heian, the Swallow, had a service ceiling of roughly 36,000 feet. In theory, I could reach them. In practice, by the time I had climbed that high, my engine was starving for oxygen. My aircraft was sluggish and difficult to control, and the B-29s were moving faster than anything I had ever chased. They were enormous. That is the word I return to, even now. Enormous. Each one was nearly 100 feet long with a wingspan of 141 feet. Flying in formation. They looked less like aircraft and more like a moving city in the sky. Sunlight glinted off their aluminum skin. From below, they were almost beautiful. From inside my cockpit, trying to intercept one, they were terrifying. The first high-altitude raids in late 1944, the precision daylight bombing missions that General Lime's men flew against our factories. We fought those. We scrambled, we climbed, we attacked. We lost many pilots, but we were at least in the fight. I personally damaged 2 B-29s in those early raids. I watched one fall behind its formation, trailing smoke, and I told myself that we were holding them. Then, in March of 1945, General LeMay changed his strategy. He stripped the guns from his B-29s to carry more bombs. He brought them down to low altitude, 5,000 to 9,000 feet. He switched from precision daylight bombing to area incendiary bombing. And he came at night. The night of March 9th, 1945, we were not ready. The air raid warning reached Chofu Airfield just after midnight. I remember pulling on my flight suit in darkness. The airfield was blacked out. No lights that might guide enemy aircraft to our position. My ground crew worked by feel, checking my aircraft in the dark, their hands moving over the engine cowling and control surfaces from pure muscle memory. The duty officer told us the raid was coming from the south. Many aircraft, altitude unknown. We took off into a moonlit sky. There were perhaps 30 fighters from our group in the air that night. 30 fighters against what we did not yet know was 279 bombers. I climbed to altitude and turned south to intercept. And then I saw it. I want you to understand that I am not a man who uses dramatic language easily. I am describing a memory that is now 80 years old, and I have spent those 80 years trying to find words adequate to what I saw when I looked south from my cockpit on the night of March 9th, 1945. The sky was on fire, not metaphorically. The entire southern horizon was orange, a wall of flame that stretched from east to west, as far as I could see in either direction, climbing thousands of feet into the air. Lit from below by the burning city, the smoke column above it reached so high that I could not see its top. The light from the fire was bright enough that I could have read a newspaper in my cockpit. And moving through that orange sky, in and out of the smoke were the B-29s. They came in a stream. Not the tight formation of the daylight raids, but a long, continuous river of aircraft, each one following a corridor marked by Pathfinder aircraft that had dropped clusters of burning napalm on the streets below to guide the bombers to their targets. The Japanese term for these marker fires was X marks. We had been told about this technique in intelligence briefings. Seeing it was different. Each B-29 flew at between 5,000 and 9,000 feet, low altitude. For the Americans, this was terrifying. It made them vulnerable to our anti-aircraft guns, to our fighters, to everything we could throw at them. General Lee May had made a calculated gamble that Japanese night defenses were weak enough to accept those risks. He was right. Our night defenses were almost non-existent. I had trained as a day fighter pilot. My aircraft, the Ki-61, was not equipped with radar. I had no way to find individual B-29s in the smoke and darkness, except by flying toward the light of the fires and hoping to stumble upon one. The Americans had taken away our two greatest advantages, daylight and high altitude, and replaced them with conditions that favored their bombers completely. I found my first target by accident. I was flying south at 7,000 feet into the smoke when the orange glow below me suddenly illuminated a B-29 not 400 meters ahead. It was massive in my windscreen, larger than it had any right to be at this distance. I could see the bomb bay doors open beneath it, could see the cascade of incendiary canisters tumbling out and falling toward the city below. I pushed the throttle forward and attacked from below and to the side, the one angle where the B-29's defensive guns had a limited field of fire. I fired. I saw my round strike the fuselage. I saw sparks. I pulled away hard to avoid a collision and climbed back into the smoke. I never saw that aircraft again. I do not know if it survived. The Americans' post-war records show 7 B-29s lost that night. Perhaps I contributed to one. Perhaps I did not. I found 2 more bombers in the next 40 minutes, attacked them both, and hit them both. I expended all of my ammunition. And in those 40 minutes, the city below me went from burning to gone. That is the only word for what happened to Tokyo that night. Gone. The Shitamachi district, the Low City, the Old City, the neighborhoods of craftsmen and merchants and families who had lived in the same wooden houses for generations, simply ceased to exist. The fires spread faster than any person could run. The canals that people jumped into for safety were boiling. The wind that the fires themselves created, a firestorm. We would later learn the Americans called it, sucked oxygen from the streets and killed people who had not been touched by flame. I flew over the place where the Asakusa district had been and looked down and saw nothing but fire. From 7,000 feet, I could feel the heat through the floor of my cockpit. I had grown up 20 kilometers from those streets. I landed at Chofu just before 4 a.m. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten. Behind me, to the south, the sky was still orange. The fire burned for the rest of the night and into the following day. My ground crew chief, Sergeant Nakamura, was waiting by the runway. He had been awake all night. He helped me out of the cockpit without speaking. We stood together on the airfield apron and looked south at the orange sky. Finally, he said, "How many?" "3 attacked." I told him. "Results unknown." He nodded. We never spoke about that night again. In the days that followed, as we learned the scale of what had happened, 267 acres of the city destroyed, 267,000 buildings gone, more than 1 million people homeless. I went over and over the mathematics of that night in my head, trying to find the calculation that made our resistance meaningful. 30 fighters against 279 bombers. 7 B-29s lost. A loss rate of 2.5%, which General LeMay had calculated in advance was acceptable. Our 30 fighters were not going to change that number in any significant way. We had known this. Somewhere underneath our training and our duty and our unwillingness to accept the obvious, we had known it and flown anyway. Because what else does a pilot do when his city is burning? The Americans understood something about this war that we had refused to understand. They understood that victory in industrial age warfare is not about bravery or skill or even tactics. It is about production. It is about the ability to build aircraft faster than the enemy can shoot them down, to train pilots faster than attrition can kill them, to manufacture bombs in such quantities that the question is not whether you can destroy a target, but merely when. By March of 1945, the United States was producing B-29s at a rate of roughly 100 per month. Japan was losing fighters at a rate that exceeded our ability to replace them. The mathematics had been decided years earlier. In the factories of Seattle and Wichita, in the aluminum plants of Tennessee, in the training fields of Texas, we were brave men flying against arithmetic. The raids continued. March 9th was the first and worst, but LeMay sent his B-29s back to Nagoya, to Kobe, to Yokohama, to Kawasaki. Night after night, the orange horizon. Night after night, we scrambled and climbed and attacked and accomplished very little. By the summer of 1945, Japan's air defense was a skeleton. We had pilots with fewer than 50 hours of training flying aircraft, held together with replacement parts. The Americans sent their bombers in daylight again. This time, because there was almost nothing left to stop them. On August 6th, a single B-29 called Enola Gay dropped a single bomb on Hiroshima. On August 9th, another B-29 called Boxcar dropped another single bomb on Nagasaki. On August 15th, I sat in the Chofu airfield operations room with 30 other pilots and ground crew and heard Emperor Hirohito's voice on a radio broadcast for the first time in any of our lives. His voice was strange, formal, archaic, difficult to understand. But we understood what he was saying. The war was over. I was 24 years old. I had flown 47 combat missions. I had shot down 4 confirmed aircraft and damaged perhaps 6 or 7 more. I had watched my city burn from a cockpit. I could not maneuver fast enough to make a difference. In the years that followed, I spoke to American veterans who had flown those B-29s. I sat in rooms with men who had dropped the bombs I had tried to intercept. We drank tea. We showed each other photographs of our children. We found that we were underneath the uniforms and the flags and the history. Simply men who had been young and frightened and doing what our nations had asked us to do. One of them, a bombardier from Kansas named Robert Treat, told me that from 7,000 feet, looking down at the fires, he had not been able to see individual streets or buildings or people. He had seen only the abstract light of the target markers and the pattern of his bomb's impact. He had done his job with great professionalism and felt, he said, very little. I told him that from my cockpit, I had been able to see everything. He was quiet for a very long time after that. The Tokyo Firebombing of March 9th, 1945 remains, by some measures, the single most destructive air raid in human history, more immediately deadly than either atomic bomb. Its scale is almost impossible to comprehend from a distance of 80 years. History gives us the strategic view very easily. The aircraft counts, the tonnage, the square miles, the casualty figures. These are important. They tell us what happened. But history rarely gives us the view from inside a fighter cockpit, circling above a burning city, armed with weapons that are insufficient for the task, watching from a distance close enough to feel the heat. Warrant Officer Kenji Matsumoto is a composite character, built from the real accounts of Japanese fighter pilots, including Saburo Sakai, Yasuhiko Kuro, and the declassified testimonies collected by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey in 1945 and 1946. Their words, their observations, and their grief are real. The composite is a storytelling device. The history is not. If this perspective changed how you see this chapter of the war, if it added a dimension that the usual telling leaves out, consider subscribing. Every episode of this series tells a famous battle from the other side of the cockpit, the other side of the trench, the other side of the wire. Because history is only complete when we hear from everyone who was there.